I am not religious, and I never was. Faith demands devotion, and I have always sought evidence, formulas, symmetries, repetitions in chaos. But over the years I began to notice the most important truth is never shouted. It whispers. I write this note for myself. Perhaps no one will ever read it. But if someone does, let them know. These are not the words of a physicist, not of the father of the atomic bomb, as I have been called. These are the words of a man who stared too long into the heart of destruction and suddenly began to see through it. I often think of that moment, the first flash over the desert, seconds after which everything changed. I whispered then, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That phrase has been repeated so many times that it has lost its weight in public memory, but few know where it came from. I did not invent it. It's from the Bhagavad Gita, and it's not pathos. It was the most precise thing I could say. In the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "The wise man does not grieve for the living or the dead, because Atman, the soul, does not die. It is not tied to the body. It simply transitions." Back then I didn't believe it literally, but the words struck deep into me. With time I began to ask myself the question that science fears to speak aloud. What if within this ancient metaphor lies the structure of reality? Not a religious invention, but knowledge expressed allegorically. I began to notice coincidences. The first, quantum entanglement. When two particles, once having interacted, remain connected, even if there are light years between them. It's not just a peculiarity, it's a connection that cannot be broken. The question is, if matter is connected like this, why do we assume consciousness is not? When I was 7 years old, I first looked into the night sky and asked my father a foolish, or so it seemed, question. "Dad, where does a star go when it disappears?" He smiled and said, "It doesn't disappear. We just no longer see it." Now, many decades later, I realize how accurate that answer was. It applied not only to stars, it applied to us. The second, the observer effect. On the level of elementary particles, the mere fact of observation influences the result. The universe behaves differently depending on whether someone is watching. Is that not a sign that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but its condition? The third, energy. MC2. I derived that equation. It connects mass and energy, showing that they are one and the same. But consciousness also acts, it influences, it makes decisions. If it influences, it participates in the transfer of energy. Therefore, it is energy. And if that's so, then it, like any energy, does not disappear. It changes form, but does not vanish. I still ask myself the question, if consciousness is energy, if it has a structure like a field, then what happens when the body dies? I think nothing terrible, as if one receiver switches off but the wave remains, and it can be picked up by another. Perhaps that is how reincarnation works, not in the mystical sense, but like the transmission of a signal. One mind departs, another tunes in, and part of the information is preserved. I do not claim, I do not know, but I feel there is something behind it. The fourth, cases of so-called clinical death. I've read about people who returned from a state of biological zero and described things they couldn't have seen physically. They spoke of doctors, instruments, phrases spoken in the operating room, and all of it without a functioning brain. Science shrugs. It says coincidence, illusion, hallucination. But I, having observed neurons fading in lab animals, cannot dismiss it so easily. I've seen bodies cease their activity, but in that disappearance, something elusive sometimes remained. As if something stayed behind in the room, not measurable but present. The fifth, intuition. Random guesses, premonitions, coincidences that don't fit into a probabilistic model. I felt it myself, more than once. Sensations, as if something pierces you from outside, or, on the contrary, awakens from within, like a faint voice you've never heard before but instantly recognize. Or maybe it's not a voice, but a memory, not your own, not individual, collective, former, something you touch not by choice, or maybe because the time has come. All these observations are not legal proofs, but they are the structure of a pattern that emerges if you look closely. I began to understand. Consciousness does not disappear. It is not locked inside the skull. It is a wave. And the body is merely a receiving point. And if consciousness is a wave, then death is not disappearance. It is the fading of form. But the wave's energy remains in space. I recall one of my conversations with Feynman. He laughed, as always, loudly and said, "Bob will never find the truth, but the path to it is our truth." Back then I laughed with him, and now I think perhaps he was closer to the answer than all of us. Why did we decide that the human self dies when the body stops? I'm not trying to prove anything. I haven't become a mystic. I'm just a man who has seen reality collapse under its own laws. And once you see that matter behaves as if it waits to be observed, you can never live the same again. We physicists have always sought the theory of everything, something that unites gravity, electromagnetism, the weak and strong interactions. But I began to think, maybe what we seek is not an equation. Maybe the unifying link is the observer, consciousness. I've tried to speak of this with colleagues more than once. Most listened in silence. Some smiled politely, but no one objected. We fear that if we admit consciousness exists outside matter, we'll destroy the foundation of scientific thought. But what if it's the opposite? What if acknowledging consciousness not as a product, but as a cause, is exactly what's been missing to connect everything together? The Bhagavad Gita echoes again in my mind. As a person sheds worn-out clothes and puts on new ones, so the soul leaves an old body and enters a new one. I don't believe it literally, but in this there is a truth spoken in metaphor, because each time a person dies, their energy, memory, emotions, love, guilt does not vanish. It remains in others, in actions, in words, in traces that are hard to measure but easy to feel. These are not empty metaphors. They are what the body senses, the skin, a shadow on the wall when you think you're alone but feel a presence. When I think of the people I once knew, those who are no longer here, I feel them, not as images, but as vibrations. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like an echo of consciousness that once lived, thought, suffered, created, and now it returns, in me, in others, as if everything is connected not by time, but by meaning. And if that's true, then death loses its power. It's not the end, it's merely a change of channel. When I was young, I thought everything could be expressed by an equation. Now, I'm not so sure, because some things are felt deeper than logic. This is not a rejection of science, it is its continuation, where formulas are no longer enough. Perhaps we were mistaken. Perhaps consciousness is not an epiphenomenon, but the primary force from which everything else begins, and if that is the case, then life after death is possible not as a fantasy, but as an inevitable consequence. I often think about how much we don't know, not about distant galaxies, not about black holes, but about ourselves. All our science is built on the external: measure, weigh, observe. But the internal, it escapes. When I was a boy, I thought death was emptiness, silence, cessation. Now, it doesn't seem so simple to me. There are too many signs that something continues. I'm not talking about an afterlife with angels and trumpets. No. I'm talking about consciousness as a field. Like an electromagnetic field that doesn't disappear when you turn off the lamp. It remains in space. It's just no longer emitted by the body. We already know that information does not disappear. That's one of the fundamental principles of physics. Information can be processed, scattered, transformed, but not destroyed. So why did we decide that a person leaves and nothing remains? When I look at old photographs, I don't just see faces. I hear voices. I see movements. I feel emotions. It's not a memory illusion. It's as if part of those people is still present within me. One night I woke up from a strange sensation. It felt like someone was standing beside the bed. No one was there. But the presence was. I'm not insane. I'm a scientist. And if even I, with my rational nature, begin to feel such things, then maybe we're all connected not only by genes and culture, but by something greater. Maybe the soul is not a poetic metaphor, but a real field of consciousness that exists outside the brain. After all, the brain is an organ, flesh, and consciousness is what is aware of the flesh. And that observer, it doesn't vanish when the tool breaks down. I want to believe that everything I feel now is not just compensation from an aging brain, that it is access to a more subtle perception. Perhaps with age, as the brain loses control, the soul begins to sound more clearly. The Bhagavad Gita says, "He who has realized his eternal self does not grieve over life or death. He is at peace." I can't say I'm at peace. I've done a lot. I've seen how my calculations gave birth to weapons. I've felt guilt. But now in old age I feel not only guilt, but hope. Hope that perhaps those who have gone have not disappeared, that they are watching, that they are learning, that they are, maybe not here, but somewhere. This is not dogma, not faith. It is inner knowledge, the kind you don't shout, the kind you carry within, like a light in the dark. With age, many things fade. The precision of wording, the thirst for argument, the thrill of a new discovery. But something else remains, silence. And in that silence, something is born that I could not hear in my youth. It's like radio static that suddenly forms into words. You don't understand where they come from, but they echo inside you, clearer than any logic. I still ask myself the question, if consciousness is energy, if it has a structure like a field, then what happens when the body dies? I think nothing terrible, as if one receiver turns off but the wave remains, and another might catch it. Maybe that's how reincarnation works. Not in a mystical sense, but like signal transmission. One mind fades, another tunes in, and part of the information is preserved. I don't claim to know, I don't know, but I feel there's something behind it. When I see a small child say things they couldn't possibly know, I don't dismiss it as fantasy. I think, what if they really remember something? What if their consciousness is a continuation of something more ancient? We were taught to fear death, as if it's a black hole where everything disappears. But I think death is not destruction. It's a transition. Physics has long told us that time is not linear, that past and future can be linked by quantum correlations. That motion is possible not only forward, but also backward, on the level of information. If that's true, then why not imagine that after death we don't vanish but return, not as individuals, but as a pattern of consciousness, as a principle, as essence. I think of my parents, of my wife, of friends who are no longer here. Sometimes I feel like I can hear their breath, not physically, but internally. They didn't vanish, they became part of the space. And I, still here, am nonetheless connected to them. That connection, it's not an invention, it's not sentimentality. It's what I feel when I close my eyes and listen. I don't know if anything will remain of me except a formula. Maybe no one will remember what I thought. But if even one person, after reading these lines, feels the same thing I feel now, then I didn't write this in vain. Soon everything will end. I feel it, not in the body, in the deepening silence. It's not fear, not anxiety. It's like a train slowing down, approaching the final station. You're no longer in motion, you're in arrival. And there is peace in that. When I was young, I wanted to explain everything, to break the universe down into symbols, to assemble a formula that would say, here, the essence of it all. Now I understand. Some things don't fit into an equation, because they lie beyond numbers. They are in the pauses, in the inflections, in those moments where a person falls silent and feels, something greater is here. I don't believe in religions. I don't believe in fairy tales. But I feel that life is not a line, but a circle. And we are not points, but movements. Each of us is not just a body, but a wave of consciousness. And when the body goes, the wave returns to the ocean, the very one they called Brahman in the Gita, the one physicists seek intuitively, without knowing what they're seeking. We lived in an age of materialism. We thought a human being was a bundle of chemistry. But I was wrong. We were all wrong. Consciousness is not a product. It is the foundation. I don't know what will happen when I close my eyes for the last time, but I am not afraid. I think I'll open them in another light. Maybe without a name, without form, but with the same feeling, I am. And maybe there, beyond the edge, I will meet again those I have lost, or simply feel them, as I have felt them all my life, without realizing it was them. If you are reading this, whether you are a physicist, a poet, an ordinary person, remember, what is most real in us does not disappear. Neither death nor time nor oblivion can destroy what is not woven of matter, but of meaning. Protect what shines within you. That is the soul, and that is what will outlast everything. If someone, one day, 10, 20, 100 years from now, finds this text, let them know, I was not a saint. I was simply a man who realized too late that the most important things cannot be measured, only felt. Maybe the real discovery of my life was not the particle, not the equation, not the bomb. Maybe it was the slow, quiet realization that what truly matters is not outside, but within. We've built machines that peer into the farthest reaches of the universe, yet we still fear the moment we stop breathing. We've mapped atoms and galaxies, but not the soul, and yet every time we feel compassion, every time we look into someone's eyes and recognize them, even if we've never met, every time we mourn, not because something is lost, but because something meaningful once was. We are touching that invisible field, that same energy I've tried to name in equations, but could only feel in silence. I don't know if this will survive me. I don't know if these pages will matter, but if there's even one person out there, someday, somewhere, who finds comfort in these words, then maybe in some quiet way, I will still be here. Not as a voice, not as a legend, but as part of the pattern, as part of the wave, the same wave you are part of too. So remember, you are more than flesh. You are more than thought. You are awareness itself. And awareness does not end. Thank you for listening. See you, wherever that beyond may be. Robert, if this story made you think, support it with a like. That way, we can share important reflections with even more people, and be sure to write in the comments how you feel after reading. Every thought is part of the shared field, and we always read them. Thank you for being with us to the end. See you in the next stories.